Welcome to ICN Sunday Morning. I'm Vernon Loeb, Executive Editor. One consequence of President Trump's drill, baby, drill green light for the oil and gas industry is a proliferation of something called produced water, the toxic wastewater byproduct of fracking for oil and gas. It's currently being produced in the country's most productive oil field, Texas's Permian Basin, at a rate of 1 billion gallons a day. Disposing of produced water is problematic. Treating or cleaning it to some degree is even more problematic. And the produced water disposal problem comes as Texas suffers from severe drought and water shortages. In a minute, I'll be joined by Martha Pskowski, who covers climate change and the oil and gas industry for us in Texas. Martha grew up outside Washington, D.C., but now lives in El Paso. She has a master's degree in journalism and international relations from New York University and is a fluent Spanish speaker. Martha, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Vernon. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we ran a story earlier this week that you wrote about water being used for fracking being withdrawn from the Rio Grande and the Pecos rivers. And you produced a sort of an exclusive analysis of this phenomenon. What drew you to this story?
Well, I started reporting on it because someone reached out to me that they had heard that this water is being sold from Red Bluff Reservoir, which is on the Pecos River. And I started looking into it. I went out to a meeting of the district to kind of learn what was going on. And the volumes from the Pecos are huge because when we're talking about water, millions of gallons is, what a farmer uses or a community. And then so I extended the story to the Rio Grande, where it's a lot more water being used for oil and gas. And I was able to get records from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So surface water in a river is owned by the state of Texas, but then the state gives water rights to farmers, to cities. So I was able to get documents showing exactly how much water had been used by oil and gas companies and add that all up over the last couple of years. There was a report from an NGO in 2021 on this issue, but no one had really gone back to update it. And what I found is actually there's slightly more water being used from the Rio Grande for oil and gas production than there was in that period they analyzed in 2021. So these companies are putting a big emphasis on recycling water and using less fresh water in their operations. So there has been progress in some ways, but what I found is there's still a lot of Rio Grande water being used, at a time when that river is under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, the reservoirs are low. So just wanted to shed some light on the role oil and gas plays in using our surface water in Texas.
So when billions of gallons of water are being removed from these rivers for fracking, will that mean at some point that maybe the communities that rely on these reservoirs and these rivers for their drinking water will run out of water or have to conserve water in order to enable fracking to take place?
At this point, we're not facing a situation where Laredo or another city on the Rio Grande might run out of water. There is a priority placed on water rights for municipalities, but planners project that within about 15 years, that Rio Grande water is not going to be enough for the cities that rely on it. So the water rights that exist right now, that's based on how much water historically has been in the river, but with climate change, drought, treaty negotiations with Mexico, we can't count on that forever. And Texas is also growing. So, the question is, what is the best use of that water, which, ultimately is owned by the state of Texas. And if oil and gas companies have an alternative water source that might be more sustainable than drawing from this river that's also essential for a lot of cities and farmers who don't have those alternatives.
So once you use all this water for fracking, can it ever be returned to the hydrologic cycle and used again as drinking water?
That's one of the issues here. Some of the water is used when the well is being drilled, some for when it's being fracked, which is creating all those little fissures. And in that process, there's a lot of chemicals that are injected. It also kind of mixes with these underground reservoirs or kind of pockets of water that might have a lot of chloride or arsenic. So when it comes back up, it's really dirty water. We don't want that back out in the environment. So almost all of it's injected back underground, and that's never gonna, flow back into the river. Whereas if, say you're a farmer irrigating your fields, a certain amount of that water does eventually reach the river again and keep cycling through. But when we just inject all this water underground, that's gone forever and we're not going to get it back.
Yeah. Your first big expose related to produced water came back in 23, I think, when you, using the state's own data, showed that there had been 148 million gallons of produced water spilled in about a decade in like 10,000 different incidents. Um, how were you able to figure that out?
It was quite a reporting project. I learned that Texas doesn't require companies to report these spills. The produced water, it's extremely salty. It can have a lot of chemicals and harmful constituents in it, but there's no requirement to tell the state if you've spilled 1,000 barrels of it. But a lot of these spills are recorded on logs that are, someone calls in, a company calls in, someone at the Railroad Commission writes it down. So we got hundreds of pages of these and spent hours and hours cleaning them up. I was working with Peter Aldis, who does a lot of data reporting with Inside Climate News. So we got these logs into a usable state to calculate how much produced water has been spilled. And the results were pretty shocking. And, the state regulators had never even added up these totals and, heard from a lot of people that this was a really useful and innovative approach to looking at the problem.
Yeah, yeah. I always love it as journalists when we can come up with knowledge or wisdom even based on state records that the state itself was never even aware of. Yeah, that was great. Last question. So you've also written a lot about how the industry now is looking at trying to treat and clean produced water, at least to the point, if not for turning it back into drinking water, at least so that it can be released into streams and creeks and rivers without too much environmental damage. Um, where does that process stand right now?
There's a number of permits that companies have applied for. So those applications are in. The state regulators have been reviewing them for I think almost 2 years now. This process has been open, but they have yet to issue a final permit. So what I'm hearing is there's still a lot of difficulty in determining what the exact standards will be. There's scientific research going on, but this is really probably going to be the first time that a state permits these discharges on a large scale. So, what exactly are they going to ask the companies to test for? What levels of these constituents are they going to determine are safe to release back out into the environment? So, a number of companies have applied for permits out in the Permian Basin, in the Pecos River watershed. So far, they're still pending, but it really is a big bottleneck right now in the industry. There's just more water than they know what to do with. And these underground injection wells are being restricted because they're causing earthquakes. So everyone's really looking for an alternative, but to treat it and discharge it into a river, there's a lot of valid concerns there. And, I went out to one of the companies that's doing some testing to kind of prove up their methods. And, everyone, they don't want to mess up because it's going to be, they're going to have a lot of eyes on what they're doing when these discharges go forward.
Yeah, it's a billion gallon a day problem, I guess, is one way to look at it.
Yeah, and the earthquakes haven't let up. I live about 200 miles from the Permian Basin, but you can feel the earthquakes even here in El Paso. And there's restrictions on the deep injection wells, so there's more produced water being injected into shallow formations. But we've had a few earthquakes of over 4.0 and 5.0 this year. So there's just a lot of pressure underground from all that water that's been injected.
Yeah, yeah. Martha, thanks so much for chatting with me. I'm really, really delighted that you're digging into this topic and staying on it. And I hope readers will keep reading us and keep reading your work from Texas there. Thanks so much. And thanks to all of you for reading, for taking the time to understand all the ramifications of the climate crisis, and for supporting Inside Climate News.